Alright, I want to give my bit on iAds. Now I know I'm a little late on this, but I've gone over some things with iAds and I've found some very interesting things that I felt were worthwhile for sharing. First and foremost, let's start off with what Steve Jobs is after. My own personal opinion, he likes to control the entire user experience, and thus an ugly ad is an eyesore and would rather not have that on the platform. There's other points that I'll get to as well, but I know that's one point as Jobs gets into the statement of saying, well, advertisements have to be interactive and emotional, and it's either one or the other and not quite sufficient in both areas. What's funny though is there going to be a panel within Apple that dictates what is sufficient for interactivity and how much emotion is shown to this advertisement? I thought art was subjective. A piece of art for a guy over here could be a treasure, but for a person over here it could be a pile of trash. So I guess there's a committee to say this has enough emotion and this has enough interactivity, and you get to work with an iAds. The other thing is that there is a very high point of entry. From articles now, they're saying Apple's going to charge $1 million. That's 3 times more than what most advertisers are used to. But let's just say you can even afford that price tag as a company, and I think that that's a big barrier as well for smaller companies that would like to participate. So are we only going to have a certain class of advertisers that can reach and pay that $1 million mark, and therefore that's it? That's the only class of advertisers we get to see on iAds? And what about a company that finally pays that $1 million and all they really want to do is have a very nice banner? No menus and no videos. They didn't want to get into that kind of production, and they're happy with just what the banner says and let it go to the website. Is that going to get denied? It must have the interactivity, it must have the emotion? I don't know. Then the next piece of it. I think it's great that Apple's getting into the advertising business. Don't get me wrong. I fully support them. And hey, we do need more competition in the advertising arena. Now, I know a lot of ads out there, especially on the web, are done in Flash. And obviously we've all hashed out the whole Apple versus Adobe thing. But because of that, and a lot of ads are Flash-based and they don't run, it makes sense to make a network that Apple controls and is predominantly going to be their own video codec and their HTML5 tools, and they're pushing these toolkits and hoping other people push toolkits to make the process of creating these ads obviously easier and likely cheaper. But we shall see how that goes. But that brings me back to a point, just to bring in Flash, to say Jobs doesn't particularly like Flash because of its drain on system resources, i.e. battery life. So we get into OS 4 and we see task switching, multitasking, which is really concurrency, running concurrent with each other. On the 3G, that's limited, but on the 3GS, it's going to be permitted. Now, there's a great video by my very good friend on YouTube, DRBUK, who has a great, very articulate video on an example of an ad and then what happens with the ad. So I want to show this video real quick.
As you can see, for this ad, it's a banner. It's located at the bottom of the screen. The banner contains a typical marketing tagline. In this case, new luxury sports coupe. And it also has the URL of the website that it's advertising for. So www.peugeot.co.uk. It's a car company. Also, if we move on to the right-hand side here, it has a little G in blue, which stands for Google. So this is a Google ad. And generally, if you have a look at it, it looks pretty boring overall. Nothing exciting. If you click on this banner, if you click on this ad, it's going to exit the background app. It's going to exit this application, and it's going to take you straight away to Safari and direct you to that URL, www.peugeot.co.uk.
So there you have it. It's a plain text banner. Obviously, they're not doing much. There's not running Flash for the interactivity, and that's just a little sliver there. But the point that I wanted to go on that is with the whole concurrency and task switching. ZRB UK states that, well, you click on it and it quits the application and it brings up Safari. Steve Jobs had mentioned that, oh, how terrible that was. These ads, they got in the way, and you clicked it and it quit your application, and bam, Safari came up and you close Safari, but your application's gone. The problem I have with that statement is Steve Jobs has no one else to blame but himself or an Apple for that. They didn't allow concurrency. They didn't allow task switching. You could do the same thing on an Android web OS and bam, because it allowed concurrency and task switching. Sure, you could click that Google ad or whatever ad it is. Their browser comes up, but because it does concurrency, you can swipe it away, close it up, and whoop, there's your app in exactly the same state that you have. But now, because OS 4 allows concurrency and task switching, Apple can get away with having a sandbox layer of clicking and saying, oh, here's the ad, and if you close it, oh, by the way, here's the save state of your application. Apple has no one else to blame but themselves for that behavior of quitting an application and going to an advertisement. Now, that said, I spoke about the 3G and 3GS, about how we're having concurrency and task switching and getting into battery life. Well, I'm going to assume that we're not going to have concurrency and task switching on the 3G because of battery life. But guess what? iAds is going to function on there, and it's using background services. So we have these background services that Apple is arbitrarily saying things, but we're supposed to have like this magical expectation of things. And those background services are going to be draining the battery. Now, they're not, in ratio to other things, it may drain more than other services or it may drain less than other services. Nonetheless, it's a chosen sandbox to be run on the 3G and 3GS, while other task switching and concurrent applications cannot run on the 3G. Now, I've seen 3G iPhones that are, of course, jailbroken and run background services, and battery life is pretty comparable. So, who's to say? But it is definitely an arbitrary thing. And the whole little layer thing in sandboxing is nothing more than now OS 4 is ready to do task switching and run concurrent things within pre-described sandboxes that Apple has set up. So in the end, certainly, the interactivity that normally Flash would give you is going to come through HTML5 and Apple's video codecs thereof, JavaScripts and things like that, and that's great. And then you're going to have, which I'm still unclear on, how a interactivity in emotional ad is allowed, or if it's just a banner it's going to be allowed and no interactivity and emotion, what have you. But it is a good thing that Apple is entering the market. It's going to definitely give other players a run for the money, and it's definitely a sensible approach to handling advertisements, since, for now at least, a lot of the ads that are interactive, Flash-based, and I understand Jobs wants some of that interactivity, and he's got a pathway to get it there. So we shall see how it happens. Thanks for watching.